In this video, we're going to talk about Jesus sitting on his ass. I'm Katav, and this is Hermeneutics. I'm releasing this video on Palm Sunday, which in the Christian tradition is the commemoration of Jesus' arrival at Jerusalem for the final week of his life, often called the Triumphal Entry. All four of the New Testament's Gospels provide an account of the Triumphal Entry, but they don't all agree on the details. Mark, Luke, and John depict Jesus riding on a single donkey, but for some reason, the Gospel of Matthew has two donkeys. So let's try to figure out Matthew's double donkey situation. At the outset, I want to clarify that this is not a question about history. The real historical Jesus likely came to Jerusalem at some point, but we don't have any way to prove when or how he did that. So the question at hand is not how many donkeys were there really, because we can't know that. Our question is instead, why does one author paint a different picture than the others? So let's set the stage. Jesus is outside Jerusalem and he wants to enter. In the Gospel of John, he just finds a donkey and rides it. But in the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he tells his disciples to go acquire a donkey or two. And that's his mode of transportation. We'll ignore this grand theft equine for now. Please don't follow Jesus' example and steal people's donkeys. Don't do that. Don't steal donkeys. So Matthew differs from the other Gospels because there, Jesus' disciples acquire two donkeys. Matthew bases this depiction on a verse from Jewish scripture, namely Zechariah 9:9. Now the prophet Zechariah wrote hundreds of years before this event, so he couldn't have known that this guy named Jesus was going to ride into Jerusalem much later. But Matthew reinterprets this verse for his own context to tell his own story. Let's look at this verse. The original Hebrew says that there's a king coming to Jerusalem while riding on a donkey and on an ass, the son of a donkey. In the Greek version, the Septuagint, this king is riding on a donkey and a young colt. In Matthew's quotation of Zechariah 9:9, the verse describes a king riding on a donkey and on a colt, the son of a donkey. This doesn't match either the Hebrew or the Greek. Matthew's parallel structure is more similar to the Hebrew version. This will come up shortly. But Matthew repeats the age difference that is present in the Greek, an adult donkey and a colt. We'll also discuss this in a minute. In using this verse to give Jesus two donkeys for his entrance into Jerusalem, there are a couple possibilities for what Matthew is doing. First, some scholars argue that maybe Matthew doesn't understand the poetry of Zechariah. When Zechariah talks about both a donkey and an ass, the son of a donkey, he's using a technique of ancient Hebrew poetry called synonymous parallelism. As you can see, the second line kind of repeats the first, or expands on it. Zechariah is not actually talking about two donkeys. He's just describing the singular donkey poetically, with multiple terms. For the ancient Hebrew poet, this is a sign of artistry. Maybe Matthew doesn't know this, so he just takes it literally and thinks the prophet is really talking about two different donkeys. Alternatively, other scholars argue that it doesn't make much sense for Matthew to be ignorant of Hebrew poetry conventions. Out of all the canonical Gospels, Matthew quotes from the Jewish scriptures the most. So if anyone should get it, Matthew should. This view says it's not that Matthew is an idiot, it's just that he's relying more on the Greek version, which has an adult donkey and a young one, unlike the Hebrew version, which just has one adult. Perhaps the Greek version with two donkeys makes more sense. So maybe Matthew thinks that if a young donkey is taken, then its mother should come with it. Why separate the little kid from his mommy? That's just mean. Third, maybe Matthew did indeed understand the poetry of Zechariah, but just chose to interpret it very literally to fit his story about Jesus better. Perhaps he's just taking some poetic license with Zechariah and stretching its meaning in order to accommodate the account that Matthew has received about Jesus. In any case, it's pretty doubtful that Matthew is imagining Jesus sitting on both donkeys at once. No, not like that. Probably not that. He's probably imagining the garments spread across both donkeys, with Jesus sitting on only one of them. But ultimately, we can't know for sure what Matthew was thinking in having multiple donkeys. Maybe he doesn't quite understand what he's quoting, or maybe he's just being creative with it. But one thing we can say for sure, donkeys are cute, so the more the better.